So this by way of recap from where we started. So we've done the first four standards. So the first standard was professionalism, as you would recall, which really sets the basis for the whole Code of Ethics professional standards. Is kind of at our core. This is what we're meant to represent. This is our knowledge base. This is how we keep up to date with the laws, etc. This is how we present ourselves and how we maintain our independence and objectivity and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, we had the integrity of capital markets, standard 2, which we all know now is very important, because it's the basis of what we do on our day-to-day jobs. Of course, we have to maintain people's trust in capital markets. The next standards, so that was number 2, number 3, and number 4. First of all, as you'll recall, was loyalty to our clients. And, that covered up all the different aspects of suitability and the different considerations, confidence, and so forth. So I'm just kind of refreshing everyone's memory. And then, of course, we had loyalty to our clients, not our clients, sorry, to our employer. And then tonight, we're going to talk about the last 2 remaining standards, 6 and 7. So 6 and 7 is basically investment analysis, basis for our recommendations, etc. And the last standard is going to be, we have 2 last standards. The next one, number 6, is conflict of interest. And the last one is the CFA standards. Okay, but before we do that, let me just go and refresh our memory. To me, at least, the way my mind works is I need to have a mapping system. I need to be able to connect all the dots. And at the apex of everything related to everything we do as CFA charter holders is related to our mission statement. That should guide us. That's what the Code of Ethics Professional Standards all maps ultimately to the mission statement. And that is to lead the investment profession globally by setting the highest standards of ethics, education, i.e. competencies, professional excellence for the ultimate benefit of all society. Okay, so that's where we're at. So let's progress. Okay, a lot of what we're going to talk about in standard 5 and 6, they relate to what we've already discussed, and you'll see that in a minute. So standard 5 is investment analysis, recommendations, and the actions that we take. Okay, starting with 5A. Diligence and reasonable basis. Okay, we just look at that before we dive into it. Diligence. We must be diligent. We must be prudent. We must do our homework. And that's what you will be held accountable for in providing financial advice. And if you think about it, going back to standard 1, professionalism, that spoke about competencies. So we want to make sure that what we do, we actually put in the effort, we're diligent, we do our investigation, we do our, thorough in how we approach our analysis, and that we're independent in making decisions. And this again is independence, objectivity, are repeated over and over and over again throughout the Code of Ethics Professional Standards, that we have to be independent and we have to be objective. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here: diligence and a reasonable basis based on that diligence for any sort of recommendation. So, people make mistakes. That's okay. Well, your client might have a second view on that, but we do, as analysts, we make mistakes. We don't always get it right. If it was an exact science, there would probably be a lot less analysts, because it would be very prescriptive and it would be cookie cutter. So there is a lot of element for objectivity, but for not necessarily getting it right every time, but you do need to put in that due diligence. Have a reasonable and adequate basis supported by your research and investigation. I'm just providing a lot of narrative here because I think again, this is being the third session, what I'm wanting to do is to develop the intuition and an understanding of what is meant beyond the words, because I think it's a fallacy to think you can go in and take the exam, and if you memorize 5A diligence reasonable basis and have no intuition of what it means, you're probably not going to do that well. Okay, so have a reasonable and adequate basis supported by appropriate research, investigation, analysis, and then ultimately a recommendation, and lastly, taking action in some instances. Okay. So, you know, what does reasonable basis mean? What does diligence mean? Probably means different things to different people, but you need to evidence ultimately, and we talk about that in record keeping, you need to evidence the sort of steps that you took to come up with a recommendation. And that's why it's important to have policies and, you know, around compliance for this and all other standards. So number one, develop a policy that requires investment recommendations to be substantiated. So what were the steps you were taking? I think if you look at this recommended procedure for compliance with 5A, basically it comes down to a CYA exercise. You guys know what CYA is? Who knows what that is? Zoe, what's CYA? Is your mic off, Zoe? Who's got their mic on? What is CYA? Harry, I don't have anyone's videos on. What is CYA? Is this going to be one of those non-interactive? Last week I actually had some good, some images up, videos, where people I could actually speak to. We've got 19 now. CYA, cover your ass. So basically the recommended procedures for compliance in this case is to make sure if something goes wrong that you can substantiate why you came up with a recommendation you did. Okay. Develop a guidance that says what due diligence looks like. You know, so for example, you might say due diligence requires that you have 3 different sources of information, that you aren't reliant on one provider of information, that you have different sources, and that you're assessing, you know, the intersection in that case of multiple sources of information. That kind of makes sense. What type of criteria do you have to assess the quality of research? I think, particularly in this period of time right now, with COVID, for example, and it's all related, there is a lot of pretty faulty research or people purporting to have a basis for making claims that is not substantiated by anything, or that's substantiated by a blogger, you know. So looking at the quality of research, there's one, for example, there's one website that a colleague of mine keeps referring to. It's called Zero Hedge. And Zero Hedge is just one of these random sort of blogs that says a lot of outlandish things, and really doesn't provide any basis for why they come up with the outlandish statements that they do. So would that rank as a high quality, you know, data or information research? Nope, not in my mind, it wouldn't. Develop guidance to establish minimum levels of scenario testing. Kind of makes sense. So that's robustness testing of your modeling. You know, you need to come up with different scenarios and come up with probability bands, you know, of where your forecast might take you. And we'll talk about that also in presenting your reports, because, you know, this has all got to, when you present your research, it needs to be framed in such a way that you're not claiming to have an absolute sort of view of what's going to happen, but that you're saying, in fact, that, you know, you might see a return statistically within a certain band. Okay, so scenario testing provides that. I mean, this is all common sense, I'm sure, to you guys, if you're already certainly in the field. How do you assess providers? What are providers? Do you know what providers are? Okay, so data providers, you know, so for example, you might be paying a fortune to Bloomberg, you might be paying a fortune to Morningstar, and a variety of other different data providers, how do they rank? How do they perform? What is your criteria? So these are all, again, sort of CYA steps that you're going to have in place that, if something does go wrong, first of all, to guide your due diligence and to establish a basis of substantiation, but also to CYA cover your butts, which sounds negative, but CYA means that if something goes south, that if your client comes to you and says, well, what the heck, where did you come up with that sort of a base recommendation, you're able to go back through step by step the processes you took to reach a certain point in the conclusion that you based your recommendation on. So therefore, you present that to your client, and they should walk away at least feeling like you've done your due diligence, even if the result wasn't as you had hoped. Okay, so that's what that's about. Okay, communication with clients, and this also links back to standard 3. And this is, as you take the exam, I think you need to be keeping in mind, and the way CFA works is that they're going to try to trip you up in as many ways as possible. So definitely 5 links to 3 in a lot of different ways. In this case, then you can kind of go through and maybe do a mapping exercise yourself on how 5B maps to some of the substandards in standard 3. But this is about communication. We know communication is key. And again, what we spoke about last week, to refresh your memory, is we spoke about the need to have clear communications. That's number 1. Not obfuscated. That's a good word for you. Obfuscated. Obfuscated, we do that a lot in academia. We try to say, use really big words that make us sound really intelligent, but nobody understands what the heck we're talking about. That's not what you want with the communications you have with your clients. You want it to be matter of fact, and hopefully, matter of fact, this is what I've done. This is a result that I've come up with based on these considerations. You want it to be transparent. And the word I used last week was accessible. So you want your communications with your client to be accessible. And, there are different rules now within New Zealand, certainly and elsewhere, on the transparency of your communications and the accessibility. Okay, so speak to your clients about basic principles of your processes. We talked about that, what you've done, for your due diligence. Be able to reflect any sort of material changes that might have arisen since you've made a recommendation. What the future, what sort of changes you see happening, in coming months or years. So have those type of discussions. Be upfront on limitations. We had, I don't know if any of you attended the presentation in the webinar yesterday with Toby Moskowitz. If you didn't, you really missed out. So he is one of the top researchers in investments and financial markets, etc. And he spoke a lot about, as you do with research, about your limitations. The limitations on the data, limitation on the time period, limitation on market coverage. Again, why are you doing this? And that's the point I'll come to. So why is it important to have these discussions? Ultimately, you want to provide your client with some sufficient information that will allow them to have a sense of whether or not you've undertaken due diligence, whether or not they agree with your decision. If you've presenting to your client in a very straightforward, clear manner, that gives them the opportunity to make their own judgment, right? So that's important. This last point here, distinguish between fact and opinion. I'll guarantee you, and here I'm saying that you shouldn't say this is a fact, but let me put it this way. Within 95% certainty, there will be a question pertaining to 5B communications, certainly, and also one of the standard 3 areas that will test your ability to recognize the importance of expressing opinion versus facts. And we talked about this last week, right? So, so what did I say last week? Milford Asset Management, their KiwiSaver accounts have generated a 5% return for the last 5 years. So therefore, 2022, you will have a 5% return as well. That's stating a fact, which obviously isn't representative of the uncertainty in the market. You say, as I said last week, that over the last 5 years, we've had a 5% return. If history is a guide to future performance, then we can anticipate that we'll have a 5% again, return again in 2022. However, that's not guaranteed. In fact, your returns could go up or down. It could be more, it could be less. Okay, so fact and opinion, 95%, I'm going to change it. I'll say there's 99.5% chance that you will have a question pertaining to differentiating fact and opinion. Okay, so compliance again. I think this is all pretty matter of fact. I'll focus on the last point, and that is the procedure for compliance. In this case, you know, maintaining records on how you undertook your research, what information was used to generate your opinion, and you know that needs to be documented. That needs to be in a form that you can ultimately show your client if they're interested. And also talk about what we mentioned a minute ago about limitations. Okay, what factors are not included. Okay, so that's it. 5C, record retention. And again, this comes back to sort of a CYA principle. Record retention, you need, and record retention also keeps us honest, because if we know that records need to be maintained for a certain period of time, 5 years, it varies, but 5 years, let's use that as a standard, then we're making sure that we are keeping tight records that are viewable. If a client wants to see our records that we use to generate our assumptions, etc., you know, you need to be able to produce those. It's just a good exercise, actually, because by documenting everything, by putting it on paper, by keeping records, it keeps us honest. You know, I do that in different aspects of what I'm involved with, and I think I keep fairly good records, and it has been very beneficial at times if somebody's challenged a result or somebody is questioning my motivations. That is very helpful to have records. That's for your benefit. I think in this case, that's the important point, that record retention is for your benefit. I've already said what the procedures for compliance are. But, you know, the second point, the archive research knows anything. You know, why wouldn't you? And you need to be organized in how you maintain records. It's not good enough to have a shoebox filled with random bits of notes and so forth. You know, really be diligent in your preservation of records. At this point in time, you know, I would think in most instances it would all be soft copy. Okay, but record keeping. And as I've said this last point, it will assist you and your firm in complying with regulators, local regulators, they do require it, and also in developing trust and confidence with your clients as well. Okay. So that was 5. 6, our last standard of any significance, and to me, probably this is so there's 7 standards, right? The 7th standard that we'll go through shortly is around, you know, maintaining the integrity of the CFA brand and the CFA program, et cetera, et cetera. It's important, yes, but the 6 standards, 1 through 6, are the most important. So the first standard is around professionalism. We already talked about maintaining independence of thought, objectivity, all comes down to managing conflicts of interest. So definitely standard 6 definitely links to standard 1. It definitely links to standard 3. It links to standard 4. So conflict of interest is important. Okay. And why is it? Because you are not able, as an analyst, to provide objective advice if you're conflicted. You know, so, and there are many ways that you can become conflicted. Okay, so, and again, you look here, the guidance: members and candidates must make full and fair disclosures of all matters that could reasonably. Okay, it's not just reasonably cloud your objectivity. It's not to say that it necessarily does. I mean, you might get tickets, you know, I had tickets, God, it wasn't last year, it was 2019, to go see an All Blacks game from one of my accounts. And I did declare it because it was over $50. Did it cloud my objectivity? No, but I declared it, so if anyone questioned, I'd say, well, you know, I put it out here, I noted it, and clearly it didn't, but I still made note, because you need to disclose. Because the important part about disclosure is that by putting it out there, you're able to let others judge, your boss judge, your client judge. When in doubt, disclose. That's the type of question that you'll have. When in doubt, disclose. So if there's any question at all that something, a gift, you know, some sort of fee rebate, whatever, might cloud your objectivity, you disclose it all. And that way your client, etc., they can determine whether or not they still trust your objectivity based on what you've provided, you know, in terms of potential conflict. Okay. You know, and the second point really just builds off the first, which must ensure that disclosures are prominent, delivered in plain language, etc. So, you know, why are we doing this? Because in the profession, there are so many opportunities that will present a conflict of interest. That's a fact. That's an absolute fact. So maintaining your objectivity, which is what links to maintaining your conflict-free view, is really, really important. So it's something when I speak to groups about ethics, objectivity, conflict of interest are 2 key points, definitely. And you'll be drilled on that. Okay, disclose any potential conflict to your clients, to your employers. There are also, you know, as we saw earlier, like with investment banking, you know, there's conflict within organizations. There's conflict, personal conflicts. You know, you could see if you own particular shares, own a particular asset, you know, that could conflict the type of advice you give, because obviously if you're a majority shareholder in a particular stock, you're going to want to provide really positive, upbeat news. I had tonight, as a matter of fact, this is how bad, not how bad, but this is how serious some organizations treat, you know, potential for conflict. Just tonight, about an hour ago, I received a conflict of interest form, about 3 pages, that I have to fill out because we've just taken on a new very minor vendor at our organization, the Mass University. You know, that you might have $1,000 worth of business with a year, but it's our procedure is very much disclose and acknowledge if there is any potential conflict. It's just good to do. Conflicts as a director that you might have as well. Yeah. So I think you probably should get the importance of conflicts. Um, you know, it's funny, this last point. If the members candidate's firm does not permit disclosure of potential conflict, I can't imagine where that would be the case. I don't know why CFA includes this as a recommended procedure. I probably need to delete it. But some of the areas of potential conflict are, you know, anything pertaining to special commissions, special fees, different incentives being provided, All Blacks tickets, special trips. You can go through the list, right? So there are a lot of different opportunities. Okay, 6B, priority of transactions. This pertains to, there used to be a pretty common practice in the investment industry. It was called front running. So, and it still happens. So what front running means, it's clearly a conflict. What front running means is that you are acting in your own self-interest in advance of the interests of your clients or your employer. So if you see a particular opportunity, investment opportunity, like an IPO, we spoke about that last week. If you see a potential opportunity, oh, I think I'll take a piece of that action myself, right? That limits then the opportunity for your clients and your employer. That's called front running. Okay, so priority of transactions. You know, obviously your clients' interests come first. Your clients, even here, clients, employers, definitely take precedence over you. That's pretty commonsensical, right? That's just the way it is. So priority of transactions, something, a key word that you might come across is front running. There are so many little naughty things that have, you know, window dressing. We spoke about that. You got front running. There's a reason why we have these code of ethics professional standards, because historically there's been a lot of naughty business. So policies, again, to say when, like if you're working for Milford or Kiwi Wealth, you know, are you able to even trade in a asset that is included in the portfolios of your clients, right? Now, there would be many organizations that would restrict you as an advisor from owning an asset that you're in the position of recommending one way or the other, right? Okay, so policies and procedures prevent potential conflicts of interest. There needs to be you know, priorities of transactions and so forth. So that's quite important. Okay. The last one for 6 is just referral fees, but again, you know, this is all related to conflict of interest. You know, it's not unusual, you know, that if I was to recommend, well, I mean, this look at real estate. I mean, that's an asset class, right? I would get, if I referred a potential purchaser to a vendor, you know, I would expect to get some sort of compensation, you know, but the purchaser should know that, in fact, you're receiving a certain amount of any compensation, because that could cloud your decision-making process and ultimately, you know, might influence your referring a potential buyer to a particular vendor because they pay a bigger commission. So you need to disclose that, and then you need to, then that allows the client to determine whether or not they still want to do business with you, because they might construe that as conflict of interest. So I use the example of real estate and asset class, but in actual fact, that example pertains to any type of asset class. Okay, so any type of referral fee, definitely need to note it, disclose it, record, keep records of compensation, any compensation or any type of benefit that is paid to you, because then that others can make the determination of that as impairing your judgment. Okay, again, we should have this all on paper. We should have written policies. You know, so you as an employee know the rules. So policies are critical. Okay, so that's 5 and 6. The last two, the last standard is 7, but there's two to the 7A and 7B, responsibilities as a CFA. Okay. This is very important. Conduct in the CFA program. If you want to get, and matter of fact, we had something happen, CFA Society NZ had something just in the last month. To be honest, in my years with CFA Society NZ, this is the first time we've had a candidate who actually got caught out for doing something dishonest, and we referred it to the ethics committee at CFA Institute. So that was a candidate, not a charter holder. If you look at the CFA monthly CFA magazine, you'll see every month there's probably 20 or 30 CFA charter holders that get kicked out of that lose their charter. So members and candidates must disclose. Yeah, oh, that's a cut and paste error. Okay, so what you need to do is to not bring into disrepute the CFA program. You are not meant to be. It used to be the case where the exams, you know, the time zone differences. For example, if you here in New Zealand took the CFA exam level 1, you've got a friend in London, they're going to take it, you know, 12 hours later. You could call up your friend and say, hey, watch out for, you know, question such and such and such and such. You know, you would get kicked out of the program. So 7A is all about maintaining the integrity of the examination process. It's all about making sure that that you as a candidate, who all of you are upholding the values of ultimately the CFA program, and that's built around integrity and so forth. Okay. It used to be with the exams. God, talk about a top secretive program, like the graders. I don't even know. I don't know anything about it. It's all sequestered. You've probably seen when they elect a new pope in the Catholic Church, how they lock all the cardinals inside St. Peter's Basilica, and then you got the white smoke coming up from the chimney. And kind of when they do the CFA exam grading, it's more or less the same thing. Nobody knows but a very select group of people. Okay, 7B is reference to the CFA program. Don't misrepresent what your charter represents. What the charter represents, and again, this goes back to, you know, factual basis. The charter represents that you, when you receive your charter, that you will have undertaken 18 hours, 3 6-hour examinations that are rigorous and that test your knowledge of the skills needed to develop the requisite competencies within the industry, and that you've passed the exams, so therefore you've got your charter. It doesn't say that by passing the CFA exams that you are a superior being, although some might argue we are, a superior being who knows the market and knows investment analysis better than anybody else. That's a fault. You know, that's not a claim supported in fact. One of the examples that they give you in the exam used to be like this. I passed level 1, level 2, and level 3 of the CFA exams consecutively. I never failed once. I went straight through. The probability of that happening is somewhere around something less than 10%. As a consequence, that exhibits that I am truly a superior CFA because of my brilliant mind. I was able to do this. You get in big trouble for that. It doesn't say that at all. It says you passed 3 exams, 1, 2, 3. It doesn't say that you're superior in anything. Okay. To use CFA as a noun is not acceptable. I am, as an adjective, Jeff Stengel, Chartered Financial Analyst. I am not, you can't say I'm a CFA. There's nothing like that. Okay, so how you reference, there are very strict guidelines. I would pay attention to what you can say, and that's an example, for example, of what you can and cannot say in your signature on your business cards, if any of you still use business cards, etc. So there are very strict limitations on what you can do, how you can promote the designation. A couple of years ago, again, the local societies do a fair bit of policing. It's not that we as a society are on the lookout. It's more the case that people will call us, like this happened, the example I gave a moment ago, to say, hey, you're CFA Society NZ. A couple of years, probably been maybe 4 years ago now, there was somebody using the CFA designation in their title. So CFA Jeff Stengel Investments, and made the claim that because this person, who was in fact a CFA, but it was in their title of their company, that's not allowable. And they got in some big trouble for that. So that was probably a few years back. Okay, so that's that. And that's actually the end of where we are. So we got there in the end. So it's now 6:40. So we're about how many hours into this now? We did 2.5, 1.5 an hour. So we're about 3 hours into this. Hopefully what you will have developed in that period, during that period of time, is that you need to develop the intuition that you need to not simply memorize the standards and the code, but you need to understand how it is applied to a career in finance. And you as a CFA charter holder, ultimately, what are the considerations? So, again, the considerations are your professionalism, capital market, maintaining the integrity therein, loyalty to your clients, loyalty to your business, reporting, conflict of interest, due diligence, conflict of interest, and how you represent the CFA brand, and the exam program. Okay, so that's it for me. I didn't have any questions. It's most unusual tonight. I don't know how many people we ultimately have. We have 18. So a light number tonight. So you guys are the people who will ultimately do well on this, I'm sure. Although it is the first day of freedom, so I was thinking people are probably out at the Sylvie Park Mall at this point, those of us in Auckland. Anyway, are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, got a person. Woo! That's exciting.
I have a question. So I remember from the first session, you mentioned that there can be situations in where the different standards conflict with each other in what or at least can see.
No, I didn't say conflict. No, I didn't say that at all. They overlap. They definitely don't. They definitely don't conflict. They're supportive. They are, like I was just saying now, like objectivity. Mm-hmm. You would be asked what standards apply to objectivity. And at the top of my head, right off the bat, it definitely would be professionalism. There would be an aspect of it. Loyalty to clients, there would be an aspect of it. There would be an aspect of it with loyalty to employers, and also the standard on conflict. So they're complementary. They're not contradictory.
Okay. No. No, but I sorry about that. That's okay. It was a few weeks ago. Okay. But what I was thinking, there are situations where ethics can be a really tricky part, because you have your loyalty to your clients, you have your loyalty to your employer, and there can be there can be I imagine a situation where there is a tension.
That's always hierarchical, and that's the point I was making. Were you with our meeting last week? I was making that.
No, so my Yeah, my internet timed out, so
That's okay. So no, it's definitely hierarchical. And the point I made last week was there's a reason why standard 3 is loyalty to clients and standard 4 is loyalty to your employer. So your paramount loyalty absolutely with the client. And that's why it's important to really map all of this back. It all comes down to, if you talk about why do we care about code of conduct, professional standards, because going back in each one of these 3 sessions, I've started the session off with the CFA mission. Okay, and that's helping to develop capital markets for the benefit of all societies. Okay, at the core of any society are the people and the investors in it, right? So your employer is only there to serve the clients. The capital markets authority is only there to protect the clients. You're there to serve the clients. We're all working together to build confidence, restore confidence in the sector, so where clients, investors, are confident enough and comfortable enough with the provision of financial advice that where they know that we're acting in their own best interest, unconflicted, objective. We've done our due diligence. We've done all these right things. We've kept the records. We're doing that to build confidence. So they will put their money, their investment dollar, into the capital markets that will ultimately serve all of society. Because if you take it to an extreme, if we've, like, for example, the Asian financial crisis. I was going to use World War II, but the Asian financial crisis was another one. That was 1997. I've lived through that, had a business during that. People were pulling money out of the banks. There was run on the banks because they lost all confidence in capital markets, in the financial institution. They were putting money in their, under their bed in boxes. They're buried in the backyard. I knew people who were buying plastic tubes like PVC pipe that would fit gold coins in them, the perfect shape, and you put a cap on both ends, and you take a post hole digger and you drop a tube down the hole and you fill it full of dirt, and there it sits, and you have to put an X marks the spot, and 5 years later you go and dig it up. People do that. Okay, but the question is, I use that example, and it's a true story, by the way. I use that example to highlight, at the extreme, what happens when the investor populace loses all confidence in the capital markets. They take the money out. Does society benefit from that? No, because that's not a productive use of capital, sitting in a PVC pipe in the back of your garden. So that's what I think, and that was the message that I was trying to get through these 3 odd hours. Is you just really need to understand why do we care question. Because if you understand the why do we care question, when you get on one of these CFA exam questions, to me, and I think I'm a pretty simple guy, I just have to have that roadmap that takes me back to the essence of the question, right? And don't get befuddled, because what CFA will do in all the questions, not just the ethics, but what CFA is really, really good at, they will confuse you, they will create anxiety, they will obfuscate the question, what they're actually asking. So a lot of times what you need to do is you need to just ask the question, well, what is the question? What's the core question here, right? If you can get to the core, you can come up with the correct answer. That's my view. That's how it works.